Please welcome our moderator for the next panel, Mr. Michael Berube, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation.
All right, good morning, everyone, and glad to be here. Those of you that are still getting coffee, come on over because we're going to have a good session. I'd like to introduce my panelists and have them come up. First, Ms. Emily Durham, Vice President, Legal and Government Affairs for Electrify America. Mr. Vic Shao, President for BP Pulse Fleet. Ms. Ashley Horvat, VP and Head of eMobility North America for Schneider Electric. And Mr. Henrik Holland, Global Head of Prologis. Here, grab a seat, everyone. We will get going. All right. I apologize for this part of the audience. I won't be able to see you there. But we have a panel really focusing here on EV infrastructure really broadly, and we'll take that infrastructure word as broad as it can be. I'm going to have some questions, but we're going to try to keep this conversational. And so first, let me start by, I'll take the moderator's privilege here for a second, and I'll lead this into kind of beginning of our conversation. So as I said, I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Sustainable Transportation and Fuels at the Department of Energy. The last panel, you heard from a number of people, including Gabe Klein. Gabe is probably still in the house here with the new joint office, which is part of I'm the DOE, let's say, half of helping to lead that. And Gabe, as he likes to say, has about 4 or 5 bosses, which makes it fun and exciting. Obviously, EV infrastructure is critical to everything we're doing. But I want to start with just taking a step back and talk about a little bit broader picture at what we, not just at the Department of Energy, but at Department of Transportation, EPA, HUD, the White House, are focused on more broadly. We, in January, published the first transportation decarbonization blueprint for the United States. And it is a multi-year in the making effort. And it's not just a document, but it really lays out a can-do plan of how do we get to net zero across all of transportation by 2050. You go back 5, 10 years, that was thought as just not achievable. It was thought as the transportation sector is too sticky. We can't get there. So therefore, we're going to have to over-rely on other sectors or just rely on a lot of carbon negative technologies alone because transportation is the largest source of emissions. Well, fast forward to now, and we believe we can get there. And that plan and that document has gained attention around the world, certainly nationally. Because again, it's a can-do plan in action. We're following up with really specific action plans in every sector to try to make that happen. Electrification is, of course, a huge part of that, but not alone. Hydrogen and fuel cells, bioenergy are all critical parts of that economy, as well as addressing the fundamental efficiency of the transportation system. The more efficient the system, whether that's an airplane or cars or big heavy trucks, the less batteries or other fuel you're going to need, and demand, right? To the degree that we can help deliver more and better mobility options for people, right? But do it in a way that doesn't increase our demand for overall fuel. That will also help us with those resource pieces. So that, if you have not looked at it, I strongly encourage you, go to DOE's website or DOT, any of those agencies, just look up Transportation Decarbonization Blueprint, and please get engaged in that. And so that's going to lead me to my first round of questions. First round, I'm just going to ask each of the folks to do 2 things. Give a really short, some of you may not know what Schneider Electric is up to, or BP Pulse, et cetera. So a little bit of, tell us what you do, but in the context of how what you do will help support that overall transportation decarbonization piece. So, Emily, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Absolutely. So part of decarbonization has to be getting the electric vehicles on the road. And so that's infrastructure, right? That's why we're here right now, to talk about what will drive the advancement, the conversion, the move to electrification. And so for us at Electrify America, it's being available for the light duty and the medium duty fleets to be able to get that, those chargers in the ground, in the places that are convenient, that are ubiquitous, that are there. So when drivers pull up wherever they go, they have the resources they need to carry on in their journey.
Perfect. Vic, BP Pulse.
Sure. So BP, of course, is a well-known brand. BP Pulse is the electrification arm for BP in the U.S. and also around the globe. So we look at electrification and electricity as a new fuel type that we're adding to the mix. And it comes with its own set of challenges. For fleets, it's all about reliability, uptime, consistency, budgetability of the fuel cost. And that really encompasses a whole new set of domains that traditionally the industry hasn't really tackled. Charge management, energy management, just getting that reliability right for fleets. I mean, as a consumer, I mean, if you go up to a charging station and it doesn't work, well, it's kind of a hassle, but it's not going to kill you. But for a business that relies on these vehicles to go about their business and go about their work, charging, it's better work. So that's what we're aiming to deliver for the industry at BP Pulse.
Good. Ashley?
Nice to be here. Thank you. I've known this organization for some time. I was one of the original reports that I had in the public sector that I read as a resource, was collecting dust over the years, but I kept it. It was a really good resource. So I think SAFE is continuing to prove its preeminence in the time that we're living in. So Schneider Electric, we provide lots of technology. You mentioned decarbonization. Our 3 tenets are decarbonization, digitization, and decentralization. So within those pillars are lots of products you can put your hands on. Some are software related, but all of them help us save money, save energy, and so that's what we do. I find it fun to think about the products that we have that we can touch, which are transformers, switchgear, panel boards. Some people aren't as excited about that, but in order to electrify everything, we really need all of those things, and we need them to be super safe, and we need them to be readily available. Supply chain is a topic that has been discussed, and we have invested over $300 million in the U.S. in our supply chain, and we're a French global company, but we're also have a huge American presence. We have 166,000 employees globally, but we have over close to 30,000 in the U.S., and we have manufacturing facilities everywhere. So we make things that you need to have energy management, to industrial automation, and really we're enabling partners such as working with Prologis and GM and others to electrify fleets from light duty, medium duty, heavy duty to homes, which I'm really excited to talk about because I think it's an oft forgotten or neglected discussion point, and it's really important that if we're going to electrify transportation, that the first step is where are you going to plug in when you get home. So thank you.
Henrik, I'm guessing you might represent, if I took a vote, the group that people here know the least about. Prologis is maybe not as common a brand name as some of these others.
I think you're probably right about that. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. So Prologis is probably one of the least known bigger companies in logistics that you've never heard of. Prologis is the world's largest real estate investment trust. So we own and operate about 1.2 billion square feet of real estate in 19 countries globally. The biggest market for us is the United States. So that's about 5,500 facilities worldwide. To give you a sense, in California, we have more than 1,000 warehouses, truck drop lots, logistics facilities, parking lots, et cetera. That we own and operate. So we tend to be the largest real estate, the largest landlord of most of our customers, and we service really anyone in the e-commerce space, 3PLs, et cetera. So our approach to electrification really stems from our own commitment to net zero by 2040. But more fundamentally from the thesis that we need to support our customers with their transition to zero emissions transportation. And the reason that we think we have an important role to play in that is because the vehicles that need to transition from diesel to be zero emissions, they sit at our warehouses, at the warehouses that we own and operate, or they visit them frequently. So if you think about where it makes sense to charge vehicles, it often is at the end nodes, at the depots, at the warehouses where these vehicles either come frequently or where they reside in terms of last mile delivery. So what we are doing is investing in our portfolio to ensure that the electrical infrastructure is in place for customers to charge when and where they need it. So we do that at our own facilities, at our warehouses. We're also developing dedicated charging hubs and locations which is very much a real estate problem to solve. It's very much about finding the right spot, the right location, and getting the power in place, which is core to what we do at Prologis. And we believe that in order for this transition to happen, we need to take the complexity of all of that development and owning and operating this infrastructure away from our customers and really provide them with a very simple service.
So I think we have a pretty high level of, let's say, EV literacy among this group and knowledge of the space. So let's, we'll skip some of the broader questions. Let's dive to some of the really big challenges. The first one I'd like to talk about is fundamental interoperability. And let's start maybe on the consumer side. The analogy Henrik and I were talking earlier, I feel like today, it works certainly, right? Those are drive EVs, but it's a little bit like when you were first starting to have USBs in cars and like it works, so you're buying USB devices, but you plug it in, oh, I got to install some software, I got to do this. Like you got to do a bunch of steps. Sometimes it's seamless, sometimes it's not. I've heard, some people say we basically have almost an existential crisis. If we stay at the current level of interoperability between vehicle and charger, it's not good enough to be 95, 97, 98%, right? You can't have 2% failure rate. A number of you really represent more the EVSE side, the equipment. What do you see as, what's the big challenge? Why have we not gotten there? What is it going to take to get to really, really high levels of that interoperability? Mm-hmm.
So sure, I mean, we at BP Pulse, we handle the infrastructure, but oftentimes we end up doing troubleshooting for our customers. And we end up with scenarios where it's really not the infrastructure, it's the vehicles, and it's the firmware versions on those vehicles that all of a sudden causes the charging session to not go forth. And so I think answering your question, Michael, what is needed is sort of a consistent, reliability recertification process that really doesn't sort of exist outside of the current, charging scenario, because it is down to the level of particular firmware versions on the vehicles that matter. So there has to be a set of, let's face it, CCS is really more of a suggestion rather than a standard. There's all kinds of communication layers inside of that is interpreted differently from OEM to OEM. And so it's a problem, and I think the answer is more of an effort around standardizing and certifying various upgrades over time.
Ashley?
Yeah, interoperability is baked into me at my core. I've been preaching that choir for a while. But there are, there's pros. Henrik and I were colleagues previously. There's pros and cons to the interoperability as there are with electrification, right? And I guess it's probably less pros and cons as much as more just challenges, I would say, to overcome. And, one of them is, the beauty of interoperability, like Electrify America's experience, is access to multiple providers of equipment, which I think is extremely paramount in order for us to scale electrification. Again, back to the supply chain, we need to have a lot of equipment in order to deploy at the numbers and scale that we need to. But then there's also the software. So there's software, charger, car, and with that, there sometimes become issues, whether you're plugging in or maybe it's the network operator that's kind of behind the scenes seeing the issues. And so over the past decade plus, the industry has been working through that, and I would say it's improving. But with some of the funding, for example, that requires 97% uptime, I think one of the challenges for the industry is who's on the hook for that. If there is punitive measures and kind of figuring out how do we not temper deployment numbers because there's reticency to commit to uptime, because at the same time for the user we need to achieve that. But as the technology evolves, it's important to kind of lock in really good SLAs so you know who's responsible for what, who's maintaining it. So I think if, when the government is investing and private sector is investing, we should really be investing in business models that scale as much as technology that scales, because if the business model makes sense, ultimately the business is going to make sure that the user is happy and can charge, because if they're not charging, they're not getting the utilization, and if they're not getting the utilization, then we can't get our ROI.
Yep.
So it's all kind of a cycle, but I think right now there's a little bit of debate as to who's responsible for what, because we all know that there are issues. And so for us at Schneider, we want to make sure to do it right, so that when we do, hit the accelerate, we are proud of it and we can stand behind it, and we can see it proliferate. We can see distributors, for example, electricians are going to make our jobs a lot easier. It's not going to just be us deploying it. It's going to be happening at much higher numbers, because once it gets in the hands of the electricians and they feel good about it, we're really going to see adoption scale, because I think consumers trust electricians.
Anything to add, Emily, on that? Or? No. I'll take a stab at answering that question. Who's on the hook? I firmly believe we all are on the hook, and I know at least I saw 1 or 2 OEMs in the crowd here, right? Easy, like here, to say, hey, it's the car side. If I had 3 car OEMs here, I think they'd say, well, look, I mean, we got the vehicle. It's absolutely rock solid. It's meeting all the specs. We got 30 different chargers. They all operate different. It's the charger side. And we as government, right, are on the hook as well, because we have a certain responsibility to make sure the funds are there, but also we have the capability. So I think we all pointed out the issue. I will say, we need to move from issue to solution. Put a plug in here. DOE is just now launching and standing up what we are dubbing Vehicle Customer Charging Experience Consortium. National labs, we are going to be calling upon the OEMs and the EVSE companies to join with us, and in a big way, not just sit and talk, but we put a notice of intent out that we may be putting out a funding opportunity to build brick and mortar facilities, to build physical test equipment that can go and plug into every charger and see, does it meet all the specs or not? What are the issues? But we've got to, and we're open to every other idea. So we will play a role of government to convene and bring people together. I like to think, and lock the door, and no one leaves until we get a solutions and commitments to execute. So I think that's what it will take. So I want to pick up on your comment about business models. Business models that scale. I think that is a great thought. Henrik, from your perspective, medium, heavy duty, what do you see as that business model like that starts and that scales up? How does that work?
Well, as I said previously, our hypothesis is, like, we fundamentally believe that most fleet operators, our customers in facilities, do not want to deal with the complexity of figuring out what type of charging equipment is required, how to go through a permitting process with a community and a utility to get the interconnects in place, what to do for the 12 to 18 months that you don't have utility interconnect yet but have vehicles, so you might need to do some temporary power generation. So our hypothesis is that a charging service, so charging as a service, which is what we provide, so these are simple kilowatt-hour based business model structures that have a performance guarantee behind them in terms of uptime. We believe that providing that simple solution for customers so that they can look at fueling an EV just like they would a diesel vehicle to the largest degree possible is what will help scale this business. So we've been doing this now for about 2 years, and looking at the portfolio of projects that we're developing, that's the business model that we really see our customers like and enjoy, and that's getting the traction in the portfolio. In many cases, that business model also matches how 3PL operators deal with fuel cost today, which is often a pass-through to their customers. So it's really important to think about, as you're thinking about these business models, like, how does it match in the overarching business models of the customer that is ultimately adopting these electric vehicles?
All right, so I'm going to switch gears here to the, let's say, the light duty side. Emily, a question for you. Electrify America has probably, been one of the groups, not the only ones, but really trying to build out a national network under a brand name, if you will. What are the challenges you guys are, and we clearly, with the NEVI program, right, we're trying to do that, several orders of magnitude up. What do you see and what have you guys experienced as the biggest challenge to really create that true national network where someone can feel confident driving? I think to drop a pin anywhere in the country and say, I want to go to any place else, and yeah, I could do that in an EV.
Yeah, and to that point, I mentioned it earlier, having that ubiquitous, convenient network is going to be key to this adoption. Henrik touched on a couple of the points, right? Finding and sourcing the real estate is certainly one of the challenges. One of the second ones is permitting. That there are still jurisdictions today where we find they're treating electric vehicle charging stations like gas stations, and the nuances around those are actually really challenged, and the use case just doesn't line up. And then the last part is the utility interconnections, which Henrik also mentioned, right? Those are the types of things that slow down deployment of a nationwide network. They're not insurmountable. It's more like a parachute as opposed to a wall. And so, being able to collaborate with the jurisdictions, with the utilities, to share lessons learned about how we all can move faster and do it in a way that, this is still a nascent industry. Unfortunately, I mean, we still look at it that way, and it's getting the jurisdictions and the utilities and the other stakeholders caught up to understand what the needs are, so you can deploy at speed with that convenience factor that will really make that ubiquitous network possible.
Yeah, it's nascent. True. Just as a reminder, all of us, we see the stats, but we are at 8% of new vehicle sales right now are electric. I worked for a long time in the auto industry, and the auto industry is big. Everything it does is at big scale. 8%, 10% of anything is huge, and we're going to blow through that pretty quickly, hitting 20%. So this is, while it seems like there's been a lot of activity, it is nothing compared to what's going to come. Vic, I want to ask a question. One of the things I am really interested in is the idea of how do consumers get experience with EVs and charging through rental cars. You guys have a lot of work in that space. Tell us a little bit of what's happening there and what's going well and what's not going well.
Yeah, so we struck up a partnership with Hertz last year. We're doing a lot of their infrastructure in the U.S., particularly around airports, city centers. With airports, if I can spend a couple of minutes on that, I mean, it's a lot of times it's the first experience for a rider in a Uber that's using Hertz to rent out the Model 3s. It's the first experience in an EV. Actually happened to me on my way here from the airport a couple of days ago. And the interaction with the drivers is telling on several fronts. First of all, the guy told me that to fill up his quote-unquote tank, it's $20-some odd. It's half the price of gasoline. So he was really pleased about that. And he was even more pleased that he gets a bigger tip every time in a Model 3 than he would in a gasoline car. It's just a better, rider experience. And for the riders, I mean, they get a lot out of that interaction as well. They get to see how what it feels like to ride in an EV. So the partnership with Hertz actually conveys several things. It is large-scale deployments of EV infrastructure for Uber and Lyft and rideshare. It is oftentimes really a very convenient use case for them to do the charging before their next passenger pickup. And it kind of hits on a lot of the themes that I was talking about earlier about reliability, consistency, known cost of fuel. You have to make this easy. Mm-hmm. You have to make this easy. And Electrify America has been doing a great job on that front. Adding a lot of chargers throughout the U.S., but there's still a lot of pockets where there are just deserts. I was in White Sands National Park recently in New Mexico. My goodness, like a lot of you, I take a lot of road trips, right, in an EV. I've been doing it for 5 years, and I could tell you stories, over a drink in a bar or something. Lots of great stories. But like White Sands National Park, there is no charging. It just doesn't exist. So I ended up like in the middle of the night going into a local community college And there's nothing around other than like one single charge point charger. And I trickle charge my car overnight, and I had to hike like 3/4 of a mile back to a hotel that night at 2 in the morning, and then the next morning again, just so that I could, I could get a charge so I could leave town afterwards.
Not the adventure you were hoping for.
Yeah. So it is still really, really hard at a lot of places.
Well, we definitely have to make that a lot easier too. I am curious on the airport side. I don't know if BP Pulse, are you providing the charging at the airports itself for Hertz when they bring the cars in? And how much of a challenge, like electric loads at the airports and the whole process of charging is that?
Yeah, so several things. We're doing the behind the fence charging for Hertz. So, they got to fill up the cars before they give it to the next renter, right? So that's a private dedicated Hertz use. We're also launching a program with Hertz called GigaHubs, which is meant for public charging, but really targeted at Uber and Lyft drivers. So very large scale, 50 chargers and up, and make so that we can make it easy for that driver base. And so we're doing a couple of things at airports. And I can tell you that the experience around the country on doing these deployments is very different. We just finished work at Charlotte Airport for Hertz. The permit is fascinating. This is really fascinating. The permit for that project was literally a 30-minute over-the-counter process. Now, Charlotte Airport is an international airport, right? And putting in DC fast charging at that airport was a 30-minute process to get the permits. And I can tell you at other airports, I'm not going to name any names, we're 2 years in and we still don't have a permit. It's absolutely ludicrous. And so we're doing work now across 19 states in the US, I think, and we've over time, collected all the data, like how much time does it take to get to CD90, CD100 drawings, to get approvals, to get permits, to get utility service upgrades, the whole works. And I think, we could be giving a lot of these kinds of talks to talk about, hey guys, you guys in such and such state, you guys really suck, and you need to you need to follow some of the leaders on their processes.
So I'm curious on this idea of soft cost, right? Not the cost of the infrastructure, but all of the other cost. That was one of the major slowdowns for solar deployment. Any other perspectives on how do we tackle soft cost so it doesn't become the slowdown like it did with solar?
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to use that example because we were talking about the airport dichotomy over dinner a couple nights ago, and I wouldn't have been as diplomatic, I guess. Good job on that. So I think the soft costs, we talked a couple of times about the utility interconnect. I had this data point. I saw it on Twitter. It was a thread on the interconnection. It said there were 1,280 gigawatts of projects in the queue to connect to the grid as of 2022. And then from 2000 to 2020, 24% of the grid projects were connected to the grid that were in the queue from that 20-year period. So I read that and sort of got heart palpitations because I'm hoping that the past isn't a predictor of the future, because I think if we were to do anything, as an industry, we really need to maybe look at some of those challenges and see how is that going to dilute our focus and dilute our energy, because we're putting so much investment, so much energy. But if we continue to come up against that, we should really calculate, like, how does that 2-year utility interconnect timeline ramp down that trajectory? And so when we're trying to go fast, we're talking in DC, which is on the federal government side, but as you all know, at the federal level, it's a lot of local jurisdictions and counties and electrifying school districts. So it's going to require some soft sort of coordination, if you will, and encouragement and competition of regions, maybe between those airports. I've worked in Houston, at the Houston airport, and sometimes things go faster in different parts of the country, but sometimes where we need the most impact is where it's the slowest. So I would just reinforce that. And then on the permitting as well, I think California, for everybody bashes California for some of the things there, but the governor's office has done a great job because they've created kind of coordinating amongst the different permitting jurisdictions to try to start to have this conversation on deployment. So, but there are other things that we can do with what we have in terms of existing solutions, you know, that we can do with resiliency, microgrids. There's different things that we can do in the interim with existing technologies to try to ramp.
I want to get back to that micro, but Emily, any thoughts on soft cost? You guys are obviously building out a massive network. What's your experience been? Any advice?
Yeah, so...
oh, sorry, give me Emily.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's right. Sorry.
Yeah, no, my colleagues have hit the nail on the head. I mean, the utility side is the biggest part. And when you slow down the deployment, because you can get these projects built, and they're wonderful, and then if they are mothballed for 12, 15, 24 months, now that there are inherent costs that are added up. It's all about collaboration. It's all about getting all of the stakeholders up to speed, on board, educated about, you know, the need to get this pipeline of delayed projects through, and helping the utilities understand what do they need to do that. That will help move things faster, kind of eating away at some of those delays that are out there and the costs that are inherent with those.
Vic, you're going to add something.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the early days of solar, California got one thing right, and that was a 30-day standardized solar interconnection process. If it's under a megawatt, it's a 30-day process. You got to do these several things, and it's so many days for each. And 30 days later, if everything goes through, then you're done. You got the interconnect. So we got to have the same process for service upgrades and during EV charging deployment, because our experience is that from one utility jurisdiction to the next, it could be 3 months, it could be 3 years. The worst of it is that you don't know going in.
If I were to put, I've not worked in utility, but if I was to put my utility, let's say, hat on, right? So like we had EVSEs, we talked about OEMs. On the utility side, what I hear and what I see, right, is that they're like, look, there's a certain amount of like just where the power is. Right? So I think there's two aspects. There's where the power is, and it physically takes time to lay lines, put poles up, do those things. We are trying to create, working with EPRI, predictive tools to help them get a sense, especially in the commercial space, and where you guys are, where we can say, we got about 5 massive truck depots within a quarter mile. Pretty good guess we're going to need some power here for charging within 3-4 years. Start now. There's another half, though, which is let's say, just the permitting time. Like you said, the whatever it was, of an hour or two at one airport versus years. I'll put one other plug out there for people in the audience. So DOE put a notice of intent out through our Vehicle Technologies Office that this year we are going to be focusing in a big way on soft costs. How do we address soft costs? How do we learn from what we do with solar? We did solve, I'd say, we made a lot of progress in the solar case with community challenge programs and sharing best practices, but creating a bit of a competition. Again, we've already kind of telegraphed out this year, that is where we're going to be investing our dollars. We're going to be looking to partner with people. So please keep an eye out for those things. That's a space you want to work on. Let me go back to this idea of the fuel, let's say the soft microgrid. And Henrik, I'm curious your experience in particular when we have these large loads in a central space. What's the role for behind the meter storage, for local renewable power generation, and in the context of resiliency? Some people talk about vehicle to grid. What's your take on all that from what you're seeing happening, and what do you think will the future be?
Yeah, well, first of all, to build on the previous point of utilities and permitting being different everywhere, I think one of the issues that we're facing is that the rules around what you can do behind the meter as a self-generating entity vary from utility to utility as well, and they can be very restrictive. So we have multiple projects in development where we're looking at a 12-plus month interconnect timeline, and where we are working with our customer to put near-term, fast-deployed, RNG-powered generation in place to at least start with a project and to make sure that the vehicles that are starting to get delivered can be charged. So in order to enable that, we need a lot more flexibility to allow private operators to run these projects in utility territories. And then I think building on that, there's a lot of innovation that is happening and that needs to happen to make these types of microgrids a reality. And I think that in order for us to achieve the objectives that are being set in various, at the national level, but for various states, with the amount of capacity that needs to be brought on site, we're going to have to see these microgrids that include solar storage, on-site generation, gas turbines, linear generators. We're going to have to see those deployed. Not only does that speed up the energization process, but it also creates resiliency at the grid edge. And right now, there's a lot of restrictions in place for parties like us with our customers to make these projects a reality. Prologis is also in the process of developing, we're the second largest operator, corporate operator of rooftop solar in the country already, so we're investing heavily in on-site generation on the solar side, but also developing projects front of the meter for utilities, large-scale energy storage. Again, to a large degree, that's a real estate problem. So where possible, we look at synergies between all these things. Like, can we have a solar system on a roof with a storage system with an EV charging to take care of some of that base load? And how can we then accommodate the rest of the load either with a grid interconnect, but now we need a smaller interconnect, which is easier for the utility, they'll have it quicker, or what can we do with on-site generation leveraging renewable natural gas with, for example, a linear generator. So we look at the full spectrum of opportunities, technologies. Again, really exciting to see innovation happening in that space. We have to drive that as an industry. But boy, we need a lot more leniency on restrictions to operate those types of systems.
I do think that will come. I mean, you think about if we want to be 100% at net zero by 2050, we're going to be for 30 years now, continually every single year adding more and more. I think some of those things will update. This idea of behind the meter storage with local generation, you start multiplying. How many facilities does Prologis run overall, or how many warehouses?
In the U.S., we have about 3,500 facilities, so 5,500 global. 3,500.
Even if you're half the market, think about more. Yes. That's just the truck freight facilities. Think about every bus depot. If you haven't seen Montgomery County's bus depot, transit depot here, I mean,
Brookfield.
Yeah. I mean, give us a few seconds of what they're doing there.
Yeah, no, we're really excited. So that Brookfield project's great because it integrates sort of the part of the Schneider where I think the beauty is, right? It's not always a big project like that. Oftentimes, like electrification is going to happen with a lot of smaller projects, but the Brookfield project's really tangible, exciting integration of a microgrid. Energy as a service was mentioned, so our group Alpha Structure and Green Structure bring together so we can help Montgomery County electrify their buses, but do so where they're saving money. They can instantly finance it, and so it's a really good aggregation of both technology, infrastructure, figuring out creative business models.
80% of they think about 80% of the power for their buses they'll be able to get off of their own generation, which is amazing, right? So
it's the independence. That's what we're here for.
Resilience. You start multiplying that by thousands and thousands, 10,000 facilities. This is rather than just think about I need utility scale, PV generation or wind generation. I mean, we'll need a lot of that, especially from the retail side. But these commercial facilities, that will be a big, big asset. The grid edge, as you mentioned, Henrik.
Thank you for mentioning that. We talked a lot about commercial as well. I think Henrik and I have worked on these projects. So we work at like a PACCAR super truck through DOE.
Yep.
And the scale of the issue and the discussion on truck companies and FedEx, Fred Smith was here. I mean, there's no room for error in a normal operation, let alone once you start integrating these things. But then on the residential side, Schneider has invested in a company called Q-Merit. Some of you may or may not be familiar, but I think investing in the workforce part, I just wanted to do a little shout out there because they have 120,000 projects in the pipeline for just this year alone, and they've done 250,000 L2 deployments. So it's really important to think about kind of the labor shortage as another area of conversation. But I think, on the residential play, we talk about some of these utility interconnect issues. I've heard about people in the Bay Area that have all the means in the world to put in a charger, and they have families with multiple vehicles. If you put in an F-150, a Tesla, you already have maybe a hot tub, air conditioning. I mean, suddenly you're like, oh, I can't add all these. I need to get a new panel. And oh, even if I wanted to spend the money to upgrade, you know, PG&E or whatever utility, they're telling me it's going to take, you know, 2 years. I've seen people with our Q-Merit team has talked about people that are actually digging their own trenches with multiple EVs just because they're like, well, I'm going to take this into my own hands. So that's not going to happen, you know, across the country, but I think that's just a precursor for me of the work that we have yet to do. But I'm opportunistic about it, I'm optimistic about it, the opportunity, but I think that, you know, we just need to be pretty cognizant about that.
Full disclosure, I live here in DC. I installed my own charger, and by per code, master electrician was there supervising the work with me, but I did it myself because I wanted to do it, from digging the trench to doing all the pieces. So it is pretty interesting. All right, we have 5 minutes left. So I'd like each of you, maybe we'll start, go down the line. I started talking about the transportation decarbonization strategy we put out. Fundamental to that is the idea of public-private partnership. That, you know, it is built upon the concept that to get to net zero, it will never happen if government just says, we're going to do it, or we want to get there, we'll pass regulations. It's going to take partnership. So I'd like to ask each of you, what do you need, or what do you see government needs to do? What do you, as your entity, need from government? Or, and let's say federal, because that's where I sit, or you see the industry needs?
Let's talk more. Let's have more conversations, because we are the industry experts, and we want to help get everybody up to speed about what is it going to take to roll out heavy-duty charging depots, to help the utilities. What can we do together? Because that's what's going to, I think, single-handedly advance this industry, is having the conversations with the people who have the knowledge to be able to inform the policies and, you know, the programs and the incentives that are coming out. Let's talk more.
All right, talk more, do it together.
Let's do it.
Vic?
Regulatory certainty is I think is the most important element. Like a lot of the IRA guidance is still coming out, and the industry has been waiting for, you know, half a year or longer to achieve that level of commitment and certainty from the federal government. And that's not even the states. I mean, states have their own interpretations of NEVI and so forth. So regulatory certainty. And then second one is that the subsidies need to sunset at some point. And I think it behooves the legislators to define that criteria or that date, because a lot of the fleets that we talk to, I mean, they're just waiting for the next grant to come out, and they'll do the next batch. So they are sort of not committing to whole hog electrification until, you know, there's a next grant or whatever. And that, I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive, but in a way, it kind of stops the momentum.
Okay. Regulatory certainty, IRA guidance. I will say that our colleagues at the Treasury Department are working like literally 24/7, if my phone's any indication, because they're just like conversations end late and start early. And I think other agencies are working to help them. And then clarify, really, I think what I hear you saying is clearly articulating the path to a sustainable business case, which subsidies aren't sustainable.
Much better said.
All right, Ashley.
Yeah. So you're starting to do you feel like you work for a startup? 24/7? So I was trying to think, I would say, I'll use 3 C's. We'll go with clarity, cultivate, and corral. So 3 things. So I was going to say convene, but we'll go with corral, because corral the troops.
That's better. It's much more.
I feel like it's more illustrative.
Yeah. Picture up on the horse there with the corralling.
Yeah, it's hard to corral everybody, but, you know, clarity from everything on supply chain. I think I've seen government do a great job. I've been on the other side of the spectrum, but kind of convening or corralling the PUCs and having that kind of platform of thought leadership, because we did that with the northeastern states in the past when I was on the West Coast.
Yep.
This was, you know, obviously all the ZEV states, but it was really informative, and this was back in the vintage days, but we got together various PUCs. This was before all the utilities really stepped on the, you know, accelerant in terms of their investment, and that did help move the needle. And then clarity on just some of the rules, and cultivate in the sense that I think if Biden administration's been doing a great job of just demystifying that for the consumer and the commercial space, but I think just using the levers that the federal government has, both on the concrete policy, but also the softer things that can really make a huge, huge impact.
Okay, good. 3 C's, I got that one. Henrik?
I'm not sure if I can summarize my points in such a nice order like that. But first of all, I think there's a lot of really great stuff already happening. And I'd like to make a point that I think it's good to see now that there is, I think, an increased focus on the commercial sector, the light, medium, and heavy duty, where in the past, a lot of the discussion on EV charging has been on consumer and passenger. Charging availability, of course, that's all really important, but a very significant component of transportation electrification sits in the logistics sector. So I think inclusiveness, I think, is the word there, and I've seen that kind of change over the past half year or so, and a number of texts have been changed to be more inclusive, to include light, medium, and heavy-duty commercial aspects as well in terms of infrastructure development. So I think continuing to focus on that next to consumer, I think, is really, really important. If we can do that, that would be awesome. And then to my earlier points on whatever we can do to push a narrative that enables the deployment of grid edge infrastructure, that puts the opportunity in the hands of the private entities, public or in public-private partnerships that can deploy the infrastructure without restrictions, I think is going to be absolutely necessary to drive the revolution that we all want to see happen.
I will say, so from DOE's perspective, certainly, and all of government, the medium heavy duty electrification space is incredibly important. It does sometimes get overshadowed by light duty. I will say I spend easily half of my time in the medium heavy duty space. Yep. Some people ask me things like the NEVI program and the big CFI grants that are out there. Medium heavy duty is part of that as well. Now we do need to build out a resilient light duty network for everyday consumers, but we also need to be doing the medium heavy duty. So both are clearly envisioned in that space as well. Well, please give a round of applause for our panelists here. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Ben, Robbie, and others at SAFE for kind of pulling the conference together here yesterday, today, and for the panel as well. Thank you all.